Welcome back to Moonbound Romance Tales, where powerful alphas fall hard, and the women they underestimate change everything. Every story here is complete, immersive, and emotion-driven. No cliffhangers, no rushed endings, just full romances you can sink into. So if you love possessive alphas, strong heroines who don't beg, slow burn tension, emotional payoffs, and stories that actually finish, you're in the right place. I need you to join the pack right now. By subscribing, leave a like if you enjoy immersive romance, and settle in because once the story begins, we don't stop until the ending. Now, let's get into it.
The fall lasted 3 seconds. I know, because I counted them. One when his hands made contact with my chest and my brain hadn't caught up yet. When the part of me that loved him, the part that had slept, curled against his heartbeat and called it home, was still trying to make sense of what was happening. 2, when I saw his face, really saw it. Not the face he wore when he whispered my name in the dark. Not the face that had smiled at me across a crowded room like I was the only solid thing in a spinning world. This face was something else entirely. Jaw set, eyes cold, decided. The face of a man who had already made peace with what he was doing before he even raised his hands. 3, when I knew, deep in the marrow of my bones, in that raw, wordless place where the wolf lives, I knew this wasn't an accident. This wasn't fear. This wasn't even cruelty in the heat of the moment. This was a choice. He chose this. And then the darkness swallowed me whole. I don't know how far I fell. I stopped counting after 3. The cliff dropped into something ancient. A ravine the pack called the Hollow, so old and so deep that even the oldest elders spoke about it in lowered voices and would not meet your eyes when they did. They said things lived down there. Things that remembered the world before alphas, before packs, before the rules we built to convince ourselves we were civilized. I hit the ground the way broken things do, not with a crash, but with a kind of horrible finality, like the earth just accepted me. The cold came first. Not the cold of winter or wind, the cold of stone that has never once known sunlight. It pressed into my cheek, my palms, the side of my knee where my jeans had torn open. My body was screaming at me from 17 different places, and my wolf, that fierce, stubborn, burning thing that lived just beneath my skin, she was eerily, terrifyingly quiet. She wasn't howling in pain. She was listening. I made myself breathe. In, out. Slow, even though every inhale felt like swallowing broken glass. I told myself to take inventory the way my mother had taught me when I was 7 years old, and had shifted for the first time and panicked so badly I'd knocked over half the kitchen. Feel your hands. Feel your feet. You are still here. You are still whole. My hands were there, scraped raw and trembling, but there. My feet were there. One boot missing, gone somewhere in the fall, but there. I was still whole. I was still alive. And then I heard it. Not a sound exactly. More like the idea of a sound, something so low and resonant. It bypassed my ears entirely and went straight to the oldest part of my brain. The part that is not civilized. The part that does not negotiate. The part that knows a predator. My wolf snapped to attention so fast it felt like a physical jolt through my spine, and every nerve ending in my body lit up like a live wire in the rain. Something was in the dark with me. Something big. Something that moved through the black like it was made of it. I couldn't see it. Not yet. But I could feel it the way you feel a storm before the sky changes color in your chest, in the pressure behind your eyes, in the way the air suddenly tastes different. And I could hear it breathing. Slow, deliberate, close. I should have been terrified. Every rational thought I owned was lined up and screaming at me to run, to shift, to fight, to do something, but my wolf had gone completely still in a way she had never gone still before. Not frozen. Still. The way deep water is still. The way something is still when it is paying attention. And then it stepped closer, and I caught the shape of it at the edge of the dark massive, moving on all fours, a form so large it seemed to pull the shadows inward around itself like a cloak. The Devourer. Every pup in every pack across every territory grew up hearing that name whispered as a warning. The monster that lived in the hollow. The creature the alphas couldn't control and the elders couldn't explain. They said it had no mate, no pack, no mercy. They said it ate wolves whole and didn't even leave the bones. A growl rolled out of its chest, deep, ancient, so raw it vibrated in my teeth. I squeezed my eyes shut. This is how I die, I thought. Thrown away by the man my soul chose, and eaten in the dark. But then, I opened my eyes, and I looked at it, really looked, the way fear sometimes strips you down so bare that something almost like clarity takes over. I expected hunger in those eyes. What I saw instead was restraint. This creature, this monster that the whole world had agreed was nothing but destruction, was holding itself back. Every muscle in that enormous body was locked with the effort of it, like a storm deciding, consciously, not to break, like something fighting its own nature from the inside out. My wolf made a sound I had never heard her make before. Not a whimper, not a growl, something quieter, something that moved through me like warm light in a cold room. Recognition. And in that moment, battered and bleeding at the bottom of the world, thrown away by my fated mate like I was something disposable, I felt the most inexplicable thing. I felt seen. I didn't wait to find out if that restraint would hold. Every survival instinct I had, the human ones, the wolf ones, the ones that live somewhere in between and don't have a name, they all fired at once. And my body was moving before my mind had finished forming the thought. I ran, barefoot, bleeding, one boot gone and my ribs singing with pain at every stride. I ran through the dark the way you run when dying is the only alternative. Not fast enough. I knew I wasn't fast enough. Whatever that thing was, it had been built by something older and more deliberate than nature. I could feel the ground trembling faintly beneath my feet with every step it took behind me, and the trembling was unhurried in a way that was somehow worse than urgency. It wasn't chasing me like it needed to catch me. It was following me like it already knew it would. The hollow was a labyrinth in the dark. Stone formations jutted up from the ground at angles that made no sense, like the earth had broken apart here centuries ago and never properly healed. Thin streams of water cut across my path, ice cold when I splashed through them, numbing my bare foot immediately. Moss and wet rock and the smell of something mineral and ancient that was the world I was running through, and I had no map, no light, no sense of direction beyond away and faster. My wolf kept pushing at me from the inside, urging me to shift, to give her the body and let her run properly. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I knew the terrain. A wolf with a broken landing was still a wolf with injured legs, and down here, in the black, shifting blind, could mean landing on stone wrong and snapping something that wouldn't heal fast enough to matter. So I ran human. Slow and fragile and furious about both. And then my foot caught the edge of a rock I hadn't seen, and I went down hard on my hands and knees, gasping at the impact. And in the space of that single stumble, the sounds behind me stopped. Complete silence. I pushed myself upright, spinning around, pressing my back against the nearest stone wall, chest heaving, eyes straining against the dark, and it was right there, 3 feet away. Maybe less. So close I could feel the heat radiating off its body like a furnace. And that heat was wrong, too hot, the kind of heat that speaks to something burning from the inside out. It had closed the distance between us, not with speed but with absolute silence, which meant it had been capable of silence this whole time. It had let me hear it before. It had let me run. My breath came out in a shaking, visible cloud between us. It didn't move. I looked at it the way you look at something your entire life has told you not to look at directly, carefully, in pieces, because taking it in all at once felt like something I wasn't structurally prepared for. The size first. God, the size. Even on all fours, it stood level with my shoulders. A body built like architecture rather than anatomy, like something had decided to make power visible and given it a shape. Dark fur, so deep a black it seemed to absorb the faint gray light filtering down from somewhere far above us, wet at the edges from the same streams I'd been splashing through. shoulders broader than anything wolves of our territory produced, paws that had left prints in the soft earth behind me the size of both my hands pressed flat together. And then the face. Wolfed out but not feral. That was the thing that stopped me. There is a difference, and I had grown up around enough shifted wolves to know it intimately. Feral is when the animal takes over completely, when there is no reasoning behind the eyes, only instinct and hunger and the particular blankness of a creature that has surrendered its complexity. This was not that. The face watching me was still terrible in its proportions, still capable of ending me in a single movement, but the eyes. Silver, not yellow, not amber, not the burning gold of a dominant wolf in full aggression. Silver. Like moonlight had pooled and solidified and decided to look back at me. And they were thinking. Whatever was behind those eyes was not simple. It moved in the way complicated things move, with depth, with layers, with something that looked uncomfortably close to conflict. Its nostrils flared, pulling in my scent, and something shifted in that silver gaze. Not hunger. Something more unsettling than hunger. Something almost like anguish. I pressed harder into the stone behind me, not because I thought it would help, but because my body needed to do something with the adrenaline that wasn't screaming. And then it hit me. The scent. Under the mineral cold of the hollow, under the copper thread of my own blood, under the damp stone and ancient water, I caught it. Faint, almost buried. But my wolf senses had been stripped raw by fear and sharpened by survival, and once I caught it, I couldn't unfind it. Royal blood. I had only encountered that scent once in my life, when I was 16, and the high alpha of the Northern Sovereignty had passed through our territory for a summit. My alpha had made us line the road and lower our eyes in respect as his convoy passed, and even from that distance, even with every effort to be small and unnoticed, the scent of him had moved through the crowd like a warm current through cold water. Ancient, layered, something that made your wolf go instinctively quiet, not out of fear, but out of something closer to deference, recognition of something above you in the oldest hierarchy there is. This scent was that, but older, denser, like the difference between a flame and the source of all fire. My wolf made that sound again. That low, quiet, unwilling sound of recognition. Who are you? The creature took one step forward. I flinched, I couldn't help it. My body reacted before my dignity could intervene, and something extraordinary happened. It stopped, not because it had reached me, not because it had hit a physical barrier. It stopped because I flinched. I watched the hesitation move through its body like a shudder, watched those massive shoulders lock, watched it pull itself back from that single step with an effort that was visible. The muscles along its neck were corded with tension. Its jaw was tight in a way that spoke of restraint, costing something real. That wasn't the hesitation of a beast. Beasts don't notice flinches. Beasts don't care about flinches. Beasts don't reroute themselves mid-motion because a prey animal showed fear. If anything, fear accelerates them. That was the hesitation of a man. My hand moved to my neck without my permission. Fingers finding the mark there the way your tongue finds a sore tooth, not because you want to, but because some part of you is still trying to understand the shape of the pain. Charles's mark. 3 weeks old. Still slightly raised at the edges, the way mate marks stay for the first month, the skin around it still holding a faint warmth that my wolf had always interpreted as belonging, as safety, as the biological signature of mine and chosen and home. I had touched this mark 100 times in 3 weeks and felt nothing but love. I touched it now and felt the floor fall out of the world. The memory came the way bad ones always do, not slowly, not with any mercy, but all at once, like a door being kicked open. The wedding night, white flowers and candlelight and the whole pack watching, with that particular kind of reverent silence that attends sacred things. Charles in his dress clothes, the ones that made him look like the alpha he would one day be, tall and certain and so beautiful that looking at him had always felt like a small, sweet ache. He had looked at me across the ceremonial floor and smiled, and that smile had been everything. It had been the answer to a question I'd been asking my whole life. You. It's you. It was always going to be you. His hands in my hair, his voice low and private against my ear. saying my name like it was something precious. The mark, when it came, had been a fire that burned itself immediately into joy, the most complete feeling I had ever experienced. Like every scattered piece of me had been gathered up and made whole. I had cried. I wasn't ashamed of it. I had stood in front of our entire pack and let the tears fall freely because I had been happy, in that total, unguarded way you can only be happy when you believe you are finally, completely safe. And now I was at the bottom of a ravine, and his hands had put me here. I turned the memory over slowly, the way you handle something you suspect might be dangerous. Looking at it from this new angle from the bottom of the hollow, bleeding and cold and alone, I started noticing things I hadn't let myself notice before. The way he had insisted on the public mark, rushed the ceremony past the traditional 3-month courtship, brushed aside my questions about the timeline with a smile and a redirection. The way his father had watched the marking with an expression that wasn't joy. I had read it as solemnity at the time, formal alpha gravity. Now, replaying it frame by frame with the benefit of what I knew, it looked more like relief, the relief of a problem being solved. The way Charles had always been slightly, carefully, strategically positioned between me and anyone else who might want to discuss pack lore around Omegas and the Hollow, and what the old stories really meant. My mate didn't mark me out of love. The certainty of it settled into my chest like a stone dropping into still water, not a crash, just a slow, irrevocable sinking. He marked me, so I'd taste better. The old stories. The ones I had heard in fragments and half-sentences my whole life, because nobody ever told them properly. Nobody ever sat down and explained them plainly. The hollow hungers, the elders said. It feeds on wolf kind. And what feeds it, what satisfies it long enough to keep the peace between our territory and whatever lived down here, was an offering. A marked wolf. The magic of a mate bond concentrated in living blood, amplified by the mark, aged just long enough, 3 weeks, roughly to reach its full potency. I had not been his mate. I had been his offering. And he had smiled at me across the wedding floor like I was the answer to a question. And all along I had been the answer to a different question entirely. Not who do I love, but what does the hollow require? And how do I give it something precious enough to satisfy it for another generation? My hand dropped from my neck. I couldn't touch that mark anymore. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I moved before the grief could paralyze me, because grief is a luxury, and I was still at the bottom of the world with a creature made of darkness and royal blood standing 3 feet away, and the only currency I had left was motion. There was a ledge above me. I'd clocked it when I first hit the ground, the way your survival brain catalogs everything useful in a crisis without being asked. A natural stone shelf jutting out from the ravine wall, maybe 12 feet up, wide enough to stand on, high enough to put something meaningful between me and the ground. I went for it. My fingers found the first handhold and I pulled myself up, ribs screaming, arms shaking with the particular kind of exhaustion that comes after an adrenaline flood starts to ebb. The rock was cold and damp and uneven, but my fingers knew what to do. I had climbed the cliffs behind our pack grounds since I was a child, had spent half my adolescence up high, where things were quieter, and nobody expected anything from you. Climb. Just climb. Don't think about Charles. Don't think about the mark. Climb. 7 feet up. I heard the movement below me. It was trying to follow. I looked down and immediately wished I hadn't, because watching something that size attempt to scale a vertical rock face was both terrifying and I hated myself for this, almost agonizing to watch. Not because it was failing, because it was trying. Those enormous paws finding holds that shouldn't have supported them, the whole body straining upward with a focus that had no predatory quality to it whatsoever. It looked like reaching. It looked like something that desperately did not want to be left behind. I climbed faster. 10 feet. 11. I pulled myself onto the ledge with the last reserve of strength I owned and immediately pressed back against the ravine wall, gulping air, looking down. It had stopped. Forepaws on the rock face, body half raised, looking up at me with those silver eyes. And then it dropped back down. Not angrily. There was no snarl, no frustrated violence, no displacement aggression against the stone. It simply came back down to the ground and stood there, looking up, and what was on its face, if you could call it a face? If you could call what moved through those eyes expression was not rage. It was pain. The naked, unguarded pain of something that is used to being alone and has just been reminded, against its will, that it does not want to be. I understood that feeling. I understood it with a specificity that hit me somewhere beneath my sternum and stayed there. I looked at it for a long moment. This creature the world had agreed was nothing but a monster. This thing I was supposed to be afraid of. This offering eater at the bottom of the world. And it turned. Slowly. Moving with that same deliberate silence it had used before. Circling around so its back was partially toward me. And in the faint gray light I saw it for the first time clearly. I stopped breathing. There, across the broad plain of its back, half hidden by dark fur but unmistakable once seen. A mark. Not a mate mark. Not any mark I had a name for. Geometric and severe and ancient-looking, burned into the skin beneath the fur as if by something that ran hotter than fire. Circular, with lines radiating outward from a center point in a pattern that tickled the edge of my memory like a word I couldn't quite retrieve. And then it came to me. The royal crest. Not the current High Alpha's sigil. Older than that. The crest of the founding bloodline, the one that appeared in the oldest pack histories, the ones written before record-keeping became political, back when history was just truth, and nobody had learned yet to be ashamed of it. I had seen it once, carved into the foundation stone of the old ceremonial hall, half buried under centuries of moss. The same symbol. Exact. My wolf was very, very still. And in the silence of the hollow, with Charles's mark cooling on my neck and the truth of my own life rearranging itself into a shape I was only beginning to understand, I looked down at a monster wearing a royal brand like a scar, and thought, someone did this to him. Someone had taken something with royal blood and ancient power and thrown it down here, just like Charles had thrown me. The hollow hadn't just received an offering tonight. It had received two. I started talking because the silence was going to break me. That's the honest truth of it. Not bravery, not strategy, not some calculated attempt to establish dominance or connection or psychological advantage. I started talking because I was alone at the bottom of the world with a royal brand burned into the back of a monster, and Charles's betrayal burned into the front of my neck, and the silence down here had a weight to it that pressed on the chest like a physical thing, and I needed to hear a voice, even if the only voice available was my own. So I talked. "I don't know if you understand me," I said. My voice came out rougher than I expected, scraped raw by the screaming I hadn't done and the crying I'd refused. "I don't know what you are, or what you were, or how long you've been down here, but I'm going to talk because I need to, and you're the only thing in this ravine that isn't a rock, so—" He was across the floor of the hollow from me, half in shadow. That enormous body settled into a low, loose stillness that wasn't sleep, watching me. He had been watching me since I pulled myself onto the ledge, not the way predators watch potential meals, with that particular fixed, calculating patience that never blinks. This was different. This was the watching of something that had not had anything worth watching in a very long time. I pulled my knees to my chest, ignoring the protest from my ribs, and kept going. "My name is Lena," I said. "I'm 23. I'm an Omega from the Greywood Pack, which I realize probably means nothing to you, or maybe it means everything. I genuinely don't know how much you know about the world above this place." I paused. "I was married 3 weeks ago, to my fated mate, which is, it should be the best thing that can happen to a wolf, the absolute best thing. Like winning something you didn't even know you were competing for." Another pause, longer. He pushed me off the cliff tonight. The words, spoken plainly into the cold air, landed differently than they had in my head. In my head, they had been a wound. Out loud, they were almost a stranger's story, too clean, too simple, too few syllables for the amount of destruction they described. I laughed, and it came out broken at the edges. I keep saying it like saying it more will make it make sense. He moved. Not toward me. Not a threat. A shift in posture so subtle that a human might have missed it entirely. The enormous head lifting slightly, the angle of those silver eyes changing, attention sharpening in a way that was impossible to miss once you'd learned what his stillness looked like. He was listening. not in the passive, ambient way that animals register sound. Actively. The ears and God, even trying to think of them as ears, felt inadequate for what they were, large and mobile and expressive, in ways that his face could not currently be angled toward me with an intentionality that stopped my breath for a moment. I had grown up around wolves my whole life. I knew the difference between an animal hearing a sound and a person listening to words. This was the second thing. "You understand me," I said. Not a question. My wolf had already known it, had been trying to tell me in that persistent, wordless way she communicated when she was more certain than I was. "You actually understand what I'm saying." He didn't move. But the stillness changed, became something more deliberate, like acknowledgement lived somewhere in the quality of it. "Okay," I breathed. "Okay." I don't know how to explain what shifted in me in that moment. Fear didn't leave. Fear is not something that simply leaves. Not when you're in the dark and injured and the thing across from you could end you between one heartbeat and the next. But something moved in alongside the fear and made room for itself. Something that felt, absurdly, like relief. I am not alone down here. The way he watched me wasn't like prey. It wasn't like threat assessment or territorial calculation or any of the cold, functional modes that predators operate in. It was like I was the first voice he'd heard in years, like my words were landing somewhere deep and dusty and long abandoned, like light reaching a room that had been sealed for too long. And despite everything, despite Charles and the mark and the 3-second fall and the blood drying on my palms, I kept talking because he kept listening. And there is nothing on this earth quite as disarming as being truly, completely listened to. It was the ear that convinced me first. I was mid-sentence something about how I'd always known, on some level, that the courtship had been too fast, that Charles had steered every conversation about the timeline away from tradition, with a skill I had mistaken for confidence when his left ear flicked. A small, precise movement, angled toward me and then back, like punctuation, like "yes, I'm following, continue." I stopped talking. He went very still in the particular way he did when he registered that I'd noticed something, not defensive stillness, but patient, waiting, giving me the space to process. I started, then stopped, started again. That was a response. That wasn't just ambient movement. You reacted to something I said. The silver eyes held mine. And then, slowly, deliberately, slowly, in a way that could not possibly be accidental, he blinked, long and waited, the way wolves do when they are communicating absence of aggression, absence of threat. In pack body language, among wolves who know each other well, a slow blink means something close to "yes" or "I hear you," or sometimes, in its most intimate usage, something that doesn't translate cleanly into human language but lives somewhere in the neighborhood of "I see you." My wolf made a sound in my chest. I felt more than heard. I leaned forward slightly on the ledge, studying him the way I should have been studying him from the beginning, if terror had left any room for observation. He was watching me with those silver eyes, and there was nothing simple in them. Not aggression, not patience, not the blank, satisfied stillness of a creature that has no interior complexity. There were layers in his eyes that moved the way deep water moves surface still, but something enormous and alive turning slowly in the depths beneath. He lowered his head. Not to the ground, not prostration, not submission, just enough. A deliberate reduction in the size of himself, a conscious making smaller that communicated something with absolute clarity. "I know you're afraid. I'm not going to use it against you." My throat tightened. I had known wolves my entire life who did not possess that level of intentional care with another creature's fear. I had known alphas, powerful, decorated, respected alphas who moved through the world with the casual carelessness of those who have never had reason to think about how they affect a room, who had never needed to. This creature, this monster, this thing the whole world had filed under "do not approach, and pray it doesn't find you" was being careful with me. Extraordinarily, specifically, consciously careful. For a monster, I said quietly, more to myself than to him, "You are strangely careful with me." The ear flicked again, and I would have sworn I would have staked what remained of my dignity on it, that something in those silver eyes shifted in a way that, on a human face, would have looked like wry acknowledgement. Like he had heard that before, like he had a complicated relationship with that word. Monster. It happened on the second day, or what I estimated was the second day time moved differently in the hollow. The light that filtered down from above cycled through gray and grayer and dark, which I was using as a rough approximation of day and night, but without the sun directly overhead I couldn't be certain. My body said 2 days. My hunger confirmed it. The water from the thin streams running through the ravine floor had kept me from dehydration, but my stomach had moved past polite complaint into sustained, insistent protest. I had talked through most of it. The courtship, the marking ceremony in detail, the flowers my mother had woven into my hair, the way the whole pack had gathered, the particular quality of Charles's smile that I now had to re-examine from every angle like a crime scene. My childhood. The cliffs above our pack grounds where I had spent half my adolescence being alone on purpose, learning the difference between lonely and solitary. My wolf's name I called her Ember, because she ran warm, because she had always been more fire than shadow. He listened to all of it. And somewhere between the second gray dark cycle and the third gray morning, something in the architecture of the space between us had shifted. He was closer to below my ledge now. Not directly below, he left me a perimeter. Always. A careful distance that said, I know you need space, with the same deliberateness he brought to everything. But closer. Close enough that I could hear him breathing in the quieter moments. Close enough that his warmth reached me faintly. That furnace heat of him cutting the cold that lived in the hollow stone like something that had never once considered leaving. I had stopped finding it threatening. I had started, without entirely meaning to, finding it something else. He moved to the flat section of stone floor, a wide, pale slab of rock closer to the ravine wall, and stood over it for a moment, in a way that felt purposeful, considered, like a man standing in front of a blank page and deciding where to begin. And then, with one extended claw, he scratched something into the stone. Slowly, deliberately, each stroke made with the care of someone who understood that what they were writing mattered. 5 letters. I was down off the ledge before I had consciously decided to climb, ribs forgotten, the ground cold through my remaining sock, crossing the distance between us at a pace that was somewhere between walk and run, stopping close enough to read what he had written. I looked at it for a long time. Cyrus. 1 word. His own name, scratched into stone with his own claw, offered across the space between us like the most vulnerable thing he owned. The world tilted. Cyrus. I knew that name. Every wolf in every pack across every territory knew that name. The same way you know the name of a wound that shaped the world not because you witnessed it, but because the absence of him had rearranged everything that came after. Cyrus, the alpha king of the sovereignty, the rightful heir to the oldest, largest, most powerful bloodline in wolf history, a king so complete in his authority that the elders said the land itself had recognized him, that the pack bonds had strengthened across territories during his reign in ways that couldn't be explained by policy or strength alone. A king, they said, who had been something genuinely different, not just powerful. Good. Dead for 4 years. Lost in the Northern Territory under circumstances the official record called a border ambush and the whisper network called something else entirely. Something with the flavor of conspiracy and the shape of a removal. I looked at the name carved into the pale stone. I looked at the creature who had carved it. At the silver eyes. At the royal brand burned into his back. At the restraint I had been watching for 2 days. Not the restraint of a beast learning tricks, but the restraint of a person maintaining themselves from the inside under conditions designed to unmake them. The kingdom said the Alpha King died 4 years ago. My voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. But monsters don't carve their own names. Days passed. I stopped counting them after the 3rd, not because time stopped mattering, but because something else started mattering more: the rhythm of us. The specific, developing grammar of communication between a woman with no pack and a king in exile who could not yet speak. I talked. He listened. He responded in the language available to him: posture, ear position, the slow, deliberate blink that I had come to understand as clearly as spoken words, the tilt of his head when something I said surprised him, the slight tension across his shoulders when I talked about Charles that I recognized as anger held carefully in check. Not at me, never directed at me. Held like something he refused to put in the space between us. He was always in control of himself. Absolutely, exhaustingly, completely in control. I started to understand that this was not natural for him, that it was effort, that the hollow was not only a prison of stone but a prison of another kind, the kind that lives inside you and uses your own instincts as the bars. The gap between us narrowed by increments so small I could only measure them by looking back over several days at once. He had begun sitting when I settled onto the ledge, close enough that I could see the small movements of his breathing, close enough that on the coldest mornings, When the temperature in the ravine dropped to something genuinely punishing, the warmth from him reached me like something intentional. I started sitting on the lower edge of the ledge, not on the ground, not yet, but with my legs hanging over, closing half the vertical distance between us. He noticed. He always noticed. The silver eyes tracking the adjustment, reading the intention behind it, responding with a stillness that was itself a kind of welcome. Curiosity had been the first thing I had felt toward him, after the fear. Curiosity, then something grudging and surprised that I could only call respect. The respect you develop for a thing that is consistently more than what the world told you it was. The respect that accumulates when someone is careful with you, day after day, in a context that required nothing of them except not to be. He could have taken me apart 100 times. The math of us was simple and brutal, his size, the darkness, my injuries, the isolation. There was no version of this situation where I could have stopped him from doing whatever he wanted. And he had spent days doing precisely nothing, except existing in a way that made me feel safer than I had in 3 weeks of marriage. That does something to you. That kind of consistent, unclaimed, unrewarded gentleness, it does something permanent to the part of you that decides who to trust. I climbed down on the morning of the 5th day. No announcement. No preamble. I had been sitting on the lower edge of the ledge, legs hanging, watching him breathe in the gray morning light, and I thought about everything I had lost in the fall, the pack, the mark that now felt like a brand of a different, uglier kind, the version of myself that had believed love worked simply. And then I thought about what I had found instead, what was sitting 12 feet below me with a name scratched in stone, and a royal crest burned into its back, and silver eyes that had not once, in 5 days, looked at me like I was anything less than worth extraordinary care. And I climbed down. My feet hit the ravine floor. The cold of it registered distantly, background information. My whole awareness had narrowed to the 12 feet between me and him, and to the way he had gone absolutely still the moment my feet touched ground, the way a held breath is still. I walked toward him, slowly. Not with confidence. I wasn't performing courage. I have never been interested in performing courage. With intention. With the conscious, deliberate choice that is different from fearlessness because it doesn't require the absence of fear. My heart was loud enough that I was certain he could hear it. My wolf was pressed to the inside of my skin like a hand against a window, vibrating with something that wasn't warning. I stopped in front of him. Up close, from the ground, he was even larger than perspective from above had suggested. The top of his head was well above mine. His body generated heat I could feel on my face and forearms like sitting near a fire. He had not moved a single inch since my feet hit the ground. Every part of him was locked in that absolute suspended stillness, not frozen, not paralyzed, but waiting. Waiting in the way that something waits when it desperately wants one particular outcome and refuses to interfere with the process that might produce it. I raised my hand. Slow. Telegraph every movement. Let him see all of it. My fingers made contact with the side of his jaw. The world went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with sound. The fur beneath my palm was coarser than I expected, and softer than I expected simultaneously. A contradiction that somehow made complete sense, like most true things do. Warm, so warm. The heat of him moved through my hand and up my arm and settled somewhere in my chest like a coal being placed against old cold stone. He didn't move. I felt his jaw tighten once, a single, involuntary contraction of muscle, like a sharp intake of breath, and then release, deliberately, consciously. The same choice I had seen him make 100 times in 5 days. The choice to hold himself, to stay gentle, to refuse to let whatever burned in him become something that could frighten me. My heartbeat slowed. I hadn't realized how fast it had been running until it slowed. His did too. I could feel it through my palm, the enormous steady drum of it shifting, settling, sinking in some wordless cellular way to something calmer. I looked up into the silver eyes. This close, they were extraordinary. Not just silver threaded through with something deeper, darker at the center, a complexity of color that spoke to great age and greater depth. Eyes that had seen things I couldn't imagine, and were looking at me now like I was the first uncomplicated thing they had encountered in a very long time. My wolf didn't howl. She didn't surge forward or bare teeth or do any of the things that mark a moment as significant in the loud, declarative way wolves usually mark significance. She did something quieter than that. Something that I felt in the base of my throat and the backs of my eyes, and the old, faithful part of me that had been looking for a safe place to land since long before Charles and the fall and the 3-second betrayal. She settled, not in submission, not in surrender, In recognition. My wolf didn't see a monster. My wolf saw a king who had forgotten he was one. And I stood at the bottom of the hollow with my hand against his jaw, and the cold at my back, and the warmth of him in my palm. And I thought about how the world above us had decided what we both were offering. Monster, gone, lost, finished, and how completely, spectacularly wrong it had been about both of us. We were still here. Both of us. Still here. She fell from the same cliff I had. I heard her before I saw her, the scream cutting down through the dark, short and sharp, and then suddenly, horribly stopped by impact. My body was moving before the sound finished, crossing the ravine floor at a run toward where she had landed. And somewhere behind me I heard the change in Cyrus's breathing, and felt the air pressure in the hollow shift in a way I had learned, in 8 days, to pay close attention to. The full moon. I hadn't seen it, couldn't see it from down here, but I felt it the way every wolf feels it, in the blood, in the pull at the back of the skull, in the way Ember had been restless and close to the surface all day, in a manner she usually reserved for emergencies. Up above us, somewhere through all that stone and dark, the moon was fully risen, full and heavy and ancient. And in the hollow, where there was no pack bond to anchor you and no alpha to steady you and nothing but stone and old water and 4 years of accumulated isolation, the full moon was not a gift. It was a detonation. The girl was young, younger than me, 17, maybe 18 at the most, crumpled at the base of the ravine wall with her dark hair across her face and one arm bent at an angle that made my stomach clench. She was breathing, I confirmed that first, crouching over her, fingers at her throat, finding a pulse that was fast but present, and she was beginning to stir, which meant the fall hadn't broken anything critical, which meant she was going to open her eyes in the hollow and see whatever was behind me, and I needed to be ready for that. She wasn't what I was most afraid of right now. The sound behind me was what I was most afraid of. I had heard Cyrus make many sounds in 8 days. The low resonant growl that served as punctuation. The quieter, softer sounds he made sometimes when I said something that landed sounds that had no clean translation but that Ember received like warmth. The controlled, even rhythm of his breathing that I had come to use, unconsciously, as a kind of anchor for my own. This sound was none of those things. This was something being unmade. It started low and built not quickly, not explosively, but with the terrible momentum of a thing that cannot stop itself, a structural failure in slow motion. The full moon pulling at 4 years of suppression with both hands, and Cyrus fighting it with everything he had, and the fight being audible, every breath ragged at the edges. The sound of massive paws against stone. Not the deliberate, thoughtful movement I knew, but something urgent and wrong-paced, a growl that kept breaking open and reforming, like a voice that keeps cracking mid-sentence. I turned around. He was at the far end of the hollow, pressed against the stone wall as if he was trying to put maximum distance between himself and us, and the sight of him stopped my breath completely. I had seen Cyrus in many states in 8 days. I had seen him still and watchful and careful and something that moved close to tender. I had never seen him like this. The silver eyes were blown wide, not with the depth and complexity I had come to know in them, with something fractured and desperate, the look of a man watching himself from the inside as something tries to take over the controls. His body was rigid with the effort of containing it, every muscle group locked, the royal brand on his back pulled taut across straining skin. He wasn't looking at the girl. He was looking at me, and what was in his eyes was not hunger. It was terror. He was terrified of what he might do. The girl stirred behind me, made a small, confused sound, started to push herself upright. My body made the decision before my brain ratified it. I stepped between them, not to the side, not at an angle that gave me an exit. Directly between the girl behind me, Cyrus in front, my feet planted on the cold ravine floor in a stance that said with complete physical clarity, "To get to her, you come through me." The sound that tore out of him was anguished. Not aggressive anguished, in the way that things in genuine pain sound, in the way that a person sounds when someone they care about does something that forces them to confront what they're capable of. He took one step forward and then stopped, the whole body shuddering with the effort of the stop, and the silver eyes fixed on my face with an intensity that was almost unbearable. "Cyrus." My voice came out steady. "I don't know how. Look at me. Just me. Not her. Me." The growl fractured again. His weight shifted. Cyrus. His name. I put everything in it, the 8 days, the carved stone, the slow blinks, the jaw beneath my palm and the heartbeat slowing together. I put the recognition in it. The thing my wolf had known before my brain caught up. I put the truth of what I had seen in him in it, every careful choice, and held restraint and deliberate gentleness. I compressed all of it into 2 syllables, and I said his name like a hand reaching across a very dark distance. He stopped, shaking, every muscle in that enormous body trembling with the effort of stopping, the full moon pulling at him from above, and 8 days of something else pulling back from within, and he was caught between them, suspended and suffering, and his eyes never left mine. I didn't move. I stood between them and I held his gaze and I stayed. 1 minute, 2. The trembling so gradually began to subside. The rhythm of his breathing, ragged and wrong, began to find its way back to something steadier. The fractured growl fell quiet. The silver eyes cleared. And when they did, when the depth came back into them, and the fractured look receded, and Cyrus looked at me from inside himself again, rather than from behind the thing trying to take over, I felt the shift between us like a physical change in air, pressure. This was no longer respect. This was something that lived in the same neighborhood as need. The girl's name was Mara. She was 18. She had been offered the same way I had a rushed mate bond, a timed marking, a husband who had smiled at her across a ceremonial floor with accounting behind his eyes. A different pack, a different alpha lineage, the same transaction. The Hollow had apparently been receiving more offerings than one territory could account for. I settled her on the ledge and told her enough to keep her from spiraling into a panic she couldn't come back from. I told her about the water. I told her Cyrus wouldn't hurt her. I told her we were working on getting out. That last part was not entirely true yet, but I intended to make it true. Cyrus had withdrawn after the full moon crisis. Not far, he never went far, but inward, folded into himself in a way I hadn't seen since the first days, when I hadn't yet understood what lived behind the silver eyes. He sat at the far edge of the space we had come to share, his back half turned, and the quality of his stillness had changed from watchful to something heavier. Mara slept eventually, exhaustion defeating fear the way it always does, and I crossed the ravine floor and sat down in front of Cyrus, not at a careful distance, not with the perimeter we had started with. Close, within arm's reach, the distance of someone who has decided something. He didn't look at me. I looked at him. At the set of his jaw and the angle of his lowered head, and the very specific quality of stillness that I was now fluent enough in to read clearly. This wasn't the stillness of patience or watchfulness or careful restraint. This was the stillness of a person sitting inside a verdict they have already passed on themselves. He thought he had almost killed her. He thought that meant something permanent and final about what he was. "You didn't touch her," I said. Nothing. Not an ear flick, not a slow blink. Just that heavy inward silence. You heard her land. You could have been on her in seconds and she wouldn't have had time to register what was happening. You didn't. The jaw tightened slightly. I kept going. You put yourself against the wall. You put as much distance as you could between you and her. In the worst possible conditions, full moon, isolation, no anchor, you used yourself as the containment. I paused. That's not what monsters do, Cyrus. Still nothing. I leaned forward. Dropped my voice not because I was uncertain, but because what I was about to say was too precise for volume. Monsters don't mourn the people they kill. His head came up. Fractionally. Enough. Kings do. The silver eyes found mine. And what was in them in that moment was something I had not seen before. Not in 8 days. Not in all the layers I had been slowly learning to read. It was the look of someone hearing a truth said plainly that they had been circling for so long they had stopped believing it could be stated. The look of a man being handed back a piece of himself he thought was gone. I held his gaze. You spent 4 years down here fighting what this place tried to make you. 4 years of full moons, and no pack, and no anchor, and no one saying your name. And you are still in there, making choices, holding yourself, caring what happens to the people who fall down here. My voice cracked slightly on the last sentence, and I let it. I wasn't performing steadiness this time. Whatever they told you when they put you here, whatever story they needed to be true to justify this, it's not true. You are not what they needed you to be. Silence. Long, full, weighted silence. And then Cyrus lowered his head and pressed his forehead very gently against my knee. Not in submission, not in collapse. In something that had no clean name in any language I spoke. Something that lived in the space where exhausted and grateful, and I believe you all occupy the same territory. My hand found the back of his neck. Stayed there. We sat like that while Mara slept, and the gray light cycled, and the hollow did what the hollow always did, pressed its cold and its ancient weight against us from every direction. We didn't move. The plan started with water. I had been studying the streams since day one, the way they entered the ravine, the direction of current, the way the sound of them changed in different sections of the hollow, in ways that suggested varying channel widths, somewhere beyond the visible walls. Water doesn't generate itself underground. It comes from somewhere, travels through somewhere, and exits somewhere. And if it exits somewhere, then there is a somewhere to exit to. I explained all of this to Cyrus the morning after the full moon, Mara listening quietly
Kings
from the
do.
ledge as I laid it out. He listened with his head tilted at that angle I knew meant active engagement, silver eyes tracking my reasoning with an intelligence that still caught me off guard even now, even after days of knowing it was there. When I finished, he stood and moved to the northern wall of the hollow, the section I had spent least time near, the darkest quarter. He stopped in front of a section of rock and looked back at me with what I was now fully capable of reading as "come here." I went. Up close, with my hands on the stone, I felt it immediately. Cold air. Moving cold air, the kind that doesn't exist in static underground chambers. A crack in the rock face, not large, not visible in the low light, but present, running vertically from approximately knee height to above my head, maybe 2 inches wide at its broadest point. "There's a passage," I said. Cyrus made a sound of confirmation. "You knew about this." He held my gaze and something moved through the silver eyes that I had learned to read as complicated. Not evasion. More like, yes, and there is a reason I haven't used it. It took me a moment. "You can't fit," I said quietly. His jaw was tight. The crack was perhaps wide enough for me, with effort. Perhaps wide enough for Mara. It was not, by any measure, wide enough for a creature built like Cyrus at his current size. Here is the thing about a king who has been turned into a monster, and spent 4 years choosing to remain himself anyway. They do not make peace with limitation. They make plans around it. He started on the wall 3 feet from the crack, and what he did to that stone over the next several hours was methodical and enormous in scale, and absolutely, completely deliberate. Not rage, not destruction for its own sake. Precise, controlled, architectural targeting stress points in the rock face, with the focused intelligence of someone who had spent 4 years with nothing to do but study the structure of his prison. I watched him work, and my chest did something complicated that I didn't examine too closely. I helped where I could. My hands were smaller, capable of working deeper into the crack's existing channels, clearing debris and loose rock that his size couldn't reach. We developed a rhythm without discussing it. He would identify the next point. I would clear the channel. He would apply the force. Back and forth. Coordinated. Natural in a way that made Ember press warmly against my ribs. Mara helped too, once she understood what we were doing. She had more wolf strength than she'd been allowed to use in a life spent being told what Omegas were and weren't capable of, and the discovery of her own effectiveness in the task seemed to do something necessary for her. Twice, sections of rock came down faster than expected, and Cyrus moved before I had time to register the danger. A fluid, absolute repositioning, his body between me and the falling stone before my brain had finished processing the sound. Both times, when the dust settled and I looked up at him, his eyes were already checking me, already running the assessment before the adrenaline in my own system had peaked. The first time I thought, reflex. The second time I thought, no, that's not reflex. That's priority. He had decided, somewhere in the wordless architecture of how he moved through the world, that my safety was a non-negotiable constant. Not a consideration, not a calculation, a constant. I didn't say anything about it. I didn't need to. It was on the second day of working the wall that I noticed the scent. I had been cataloging Cyrus's scent since the first day I came close to him. The royal blood underneath, warm stone and deep forest, and something older that I didn't have a reference point for. It had become simply the smell of him to me, familiar and grounding in the way that a particular person's scent becomes, over time, indistinguishable from the feeling of safety. But something had changed in it. There was a thread in it now that I had not noticed before, something deeper and more deliberate, something that moved against my wolf sense with the specific, unmistakable quality of a claim being made. Ember went very still in my chest. A scent mark. Not intentional. I understood that immediately, because Cyrus was too precise in his choices to do something like that deliberately without acknowledging it. This was biological. Something in him responding to proximity and trust and shared purpose and full moons weathered together, responding in the language beneath language, the one that doesn't ask permission. He was scent marking me without knowing he was doing it. I said nothing. My wolf, for her part, did not object. The wall gave on the third day. Not all at once. A section near the base of the crack shifted, and then a larger piece came away, and then the crack was suddenly a passage, rough and uneven but present, real. Air flowing through it with purpose. The smell of it different from the hollow, less mineral, less ancient. Something almost like trees in it. Almost like outside. Mara made a sound from behind me that was half laugh, half sob. I turned to Cyrus. He was looking at the passage with an expression I had never seen on him before. Something so layered and so private that I almost looked away, the expression of someone confronting a door they had stopped believing would ever open. It moved through the silver eyes in waves. Disbelief. Then something raw and unguarded. Then something that steadied slowly into a resolve so deep it had the quality of bedrock. I reached over and put my hand on his jaw the way I had 8 days ago on the ledge. His eyes came to mine immediately. "We go together," I said. "All three of us. Whatever fits and whatever doesn't, we solve it. But we go together." A slow blink, long and certain. I felt it in my chest like a door opening. The passage led out into forest. Real forest trees and wind, and the smell of pine resin and wet earth and open sky above us. Gray with early morning, but sky. Actual sky. I stood at the mouth of the passage with my face tilted upward and breathed it in like someone surfacing from deep water. And beside me, Mara made a sound that was entirely sob and no pretense of anything else. And behind us, Cyrus stepped out of the earth and into the world. I heard him before I turned. The sound of him emerging, the sheer physical fact of that much presence arriving into open air after 4 years contained in stone felt like a pressure change, like the forest itself registering something. The birds went quiet. The wind seemed to pause. I turned and looked at him in natural light for the first time. The gray morning fell across him without mercy and without distortion, and what I saw undid something in my chest quietly and permanently. The darkness of the hollow had softened the edges of what he was. Daylight did no such thing. He was enormous, larger than any wolf I had ever encountered, larger than the stories had adequately prepared me for, and the royal brand on his back caught the pale light and threw it back in a way that made it impossible to look at and impossible to look away from. But his eyes. In daylight, the silver was extraordinary. Not cold the way silver can be cold. Warm at the center, deep at the edges, the complexity I had learned to read in dim gray light now fully, completely visible. He blinked against the light with something that looked like the specific vulnerability of a creature that has not seen daylight in 4 years and is not going to admit how much it costs him. I turned back to the tree line and kept walking, because if I kept looking at him I was going to do something I wasn't ready to name yet. The Sovereignty Castle sat 4 miles from the edge of the Greywood territory line. I knew this from packed geography lessons I had taken at 14 and never expected to personally require. It was visible from the high ridge above the hollow's cliff face, which meant we had been within 4 miles of it for 11 days, and the irony of that sat in my chest like a stone. Mara and I walked. Cyrus moved through the forest parallel to us, not behind, not ahead, but alongside. In the trees, at a slight distance, visible only because I knew how to look for him now, pacing us, keeping to cover that a creature his size technically should not have been able to keep to, and doing it anyway because something in him understood instinctively that arriving at a castle with a wolf the size of a barn was a situation that benefited from strategic timing. I didn't tell him to hang back. He didn't ask if he should. We understood each other. The gates were open when we arrived. It was early enough that the full morning shift hadn't established itself yet. The thin, uncertain hour when one watch overlaps another, and everyone is half present. 2 guards at the main gate, both in the midnight blue livery of the Sovereignty Court, both in the middle of a conversation they would not remember afterward because of what happened next. I walked through the gate first, Mara beside me, and then Cyrus came out of the tree line. The sound the first guard made was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when their body reacts before their language centers. Have any hope of catching up a short, violent exhale that contained all the information of "I am going to die" without the syllables. He stumbled backward into the gatepost. The second guard got further. She got her hand to her sword hilt before looking properly, and then her hand just stopped there, suspended, as her brain ran the calculation of whether the sword was relevant and reached a rapid, honest conclusion. The noise spread inward like a stone dropped in water. By the time we reached the main courtyard, there were 20 people in various stages of backing away, pressing against walls, gripping each other's arms in the specific way. Humans and wolves alike grip each other when something has bypassed every category they own and landed in a place that has no name yet. Screams had come and gone quick, sharp, contained by shock into something more like gasps. A kitchen boy dropped a wooden bucket with a clatter that rang off the stone walls and then stood absolutely still, as if movement might attract attention. Every eye was on Cyrus. I stepped to his side, not behind him, not at a diplomatic distance that suggested I was separate from whatever he was. Directly beside him, close enough that our proximity said a single, clear thing to everyone in that courtyard. This is not a thing I am escaping. This is where I stand. I felt him register it. The slight shift of his weight toward me, the almost imperceptible angle of his head not looking at me directly, but orienting toward me the way a needle orients toward north. Automatic, involuntary, the reflex of something that has found its fixed point. Someone in the crowd said, in a voice stripped completely down to bare disbelief, "The Devourer." And I said, loudly enough for the whole courtyard to hear, "His name is Cyrus." Silence. The particular silence of 30 people, revising a fundamental assumption in real time. A woman near the back, older, in the gray dress of senior castle staff, with the steady eyes of someone who has spent a long career deciding what requires panic and what requires management, looked at me for a long moment, then at Cyrus, then at the royal brand on his back, visible where his fur had parted in the morning wind. Her hand came up and covered her mouth, and she dropped to one knee. It moved through the courtyard the way the first guard's stumble had moved outward in a wave, unstoppable once it started. Not all of them, not immediately, but enough. Enough that the shape of the morning changed, the atmosphere of the courtyard tilting on its axis from horror toward something that had no single word for it, but contained recognition and shame, and the particular grief of a people realizing what they had lost. I looked at Cyrus. He was looking at the kneeling figures with those silver eyes, and what moved through them was something so private and so enormous that I made myself look away. He had lived for 4 years on the other side of a truth nobody above had been willing to hold, and now he was standing in his own courtyard in the body they had cursed him into. And the people who had served him were on their knees, and he was not alone. For the first time in 4 years, he was not alone. They were already there. I don't know if someone had sent ahead, or if instinct had drawn them, or if guilt has a particular gravity that pulls people toward the thing they fear most when they sense it approaching. But when the throne room doors opened, and I walked in Cyrus behind me, the senior staff member whose name I had learned was Helda walking ahead of us with the bearing of someone settling a debt. Charles and Seraphine were already standing near the throne. Charles saw me first. I watched it happen across his face in real time, the sequence of it, each stage distinct and readable. First, confusion. Then, horror. Then, a very quick and very ugly calculation. The face of a man running numbers behind his eyes, assessing exposure, assessing witnesses, assessing exits. He did not look like my mate. He looked like what he was, a man who had run a transaction, and was now watching the ledger balance itself in a way he had not planned for. Seraphine was slower to turn but faster to recover. She was beautiful in the cold, architectural way of women who have weaponized beauty so long it has stopped being about pleasure and become entirely about power. Her dress was the deep crimson of someone who had not yet updated their wardrobe to account for the fact that the throne she had dressed for was no longer available. She looked at Cyrus and something crossed her face. Not fear. Calculation. The rapid recalibration of someone whose plan has encountered a variable, but who has not yet accepted that the plan is over. She had been the one, I understood now with the clarity of hindsight, who had put Cyrus in the hollow. Not Charles. Charles was a middle actor, a local operative running his small piece of a larger structure. Seraphine was the architect, the regent who had stepped into the vacuum of a king's convenient disappearance and had spent 4 years making that vacuum permanent and comfortable in hers. The court had filled behind us. Word travels in castles the way fire travels in dry grass along every corridor simultaneously, with its own momentum. The throne room held perhaps 60 people now, crowded at the edges, the silence of them a specific kind of silence. The silence of witnesses who have not yet decided what they are witnessing, but understand that they are witnessing something. Seraphine opened her mouth. "Remove that creature from—" "His name," I said, "is Cyrus, Alpha King of the Sovereignty by blood right, and every person in this room knows that brand on his back." She turned her eyes to me, cold, flat, assessing, the look of someone deciding how much of a problem I was going to be. "An Omega from a minor pack," she said, making it a disposal. "Standing in the throne room, speaking out of turn, thrown into the hollow by her fated mate," I said pleasantly. At the instruction of a regent who has been managing the Hollow's feeding schedule for 4 years to maintain a political arrangement that depends entirely on the rightful king staying gone. I looked at Charles. Isn't that right? Charles said nothing. His silence said everything. I felt Cyrus move behind me, not forward, not threateningly, just a shift in position that placed him with absolute precision at my left shoulder, close enough that his warmth was a constant presence along my left side, standing with me, not in front of me, not over me, with me. He was watching the room, those silver eyes moving across the assembly with an intelligence and a steadiness that was, I realized watching the faces of the court, landing. They could see it too. Whatever they had been told about the creature in the hollow, mindless, feral, dangerous, gone, they were watching it, scan a room like a king who has never stopped being a king, and the dissonance was visible on their faces. Helda stepped forward from the edge of the room. "The brand is genuine," she said in the flat, carrying tone of someone who has no investment in anything except accurate record. "I served the sovereignty for 31 years. I dressed the young king for his first formal council at age 12. I know that mark." She looked at Seraphine. "We all know that mark." The room was very quiet. Seraphine looked at the door. I watched her calculate the door. She looked back at the room, at 60 faces that were no longer neutral, and I saw the moment she understood that the calculation had failed. Charles's shoulders dropped 2 inches. It is a specific movement, the dropping of shoulders that have been held and maintained tension for a very long time, not relief. Something closer to the exhaustion of a man who has been carrying a lie for so long that even its collapse produces a kind of dark physical relief. He looked at me, and for a single moment, beneath all the accounting and the cruelty and the cold transaction of what he had done, I saw something almost like shame. I looked away. His shame was not my responsibility. Helda brought the records. Old ones, the kind stored in the deepest sections of castle archives, the ones that predate the current regime's interest in what they contained. Ceremonial texts, royal bloodline documentation, and the thing I had been asking about since we arrived, the thing that I'd spent the walk from the forest
We stand
running
on the
through every
precipice.
fragment
There is
of
no
old
turning
knowledge
back.
I owned, trying to reconstruct the cursed documentation, because Cyrus was not simply a wolf who had been forced to shift. This was constructed, deliberate, a working of old magic that the official record called theoretical, and every elder in every pack I had ever spoken to acknowledged existed, in whispered, partial sentences. A curse that locked a wolf in their shifted form, that used the animal as a prison, that sank its roots into the biological fact of the wolf nature and turned it against the person who lived inside. The record described it in the cold language of someone documenting a process they had commissioned. Application point: the back, specifically over the spine, where the shift originates neurologically. The mark I had seen on Cyrus's back that I had read as a royal brand, it wasn't only a brand. It was the anchor of the working. I read the reversal conditions twice. Then I put the book down, and I was quiet for a moment, and Helda watched me with the steady eyes of someone who has already read it and is waiting for me to arrive at the same place she has.
We cannot allow
Voluntary
this.
contact.
You have no choice.
I said.
This
Sustained,
changes nothing.
she confirmed. From someone the wolf's instinct recognizes. Recognizes as what? She looked at me for a long moment. The documentation uses the word tether, she said carefully. A wolf's primary tether. Ember went absolutely still in my chest. I picked the book back up and read the sentence again, and it said what it said, and I sat with it for the length of 3 full breaths, and then I set it down. "All right," I said. The throne room was not where I would have chosen to do this. 60 witnesses and the cold political wreckage of the last hour still in the air, and Charles's presence a low, toxic hum from the side of the room where 2 guards were holding him. None of this was the setting I would have designed. But Cyrus was here, and the anchor mark was here, and the curse had been running for 4 years and had been doing its specific, grinding damage for every day of those 4 years, and I was not willing to wait for better staging. I crossed to him. He watched me come, the silver eyes tracking my approach with the same attention he had given me in the hollow, when I crossed to him the first time, waiting, understanding something of what was coming even without the words, trusting the approach because the approach was mine. I stopped in front of him. "I'm going to touch the mark," I said, quietly enough that it was only for him. "I need you to stay with me. Whatever happens, stay with me." A slow blink, long and certain and complete. I reached around him, found the mark with my fingertips, the complex geometry of it, raised against the fur, warm in a way that stone shouldn't be warm, with a particular vibrating quality that made my fingertips register it as wrong, as foreign, as something placed on top of what was meant to be there. Ember surged, not in warning. In response, like a key finding a lock that had been waiting for it, like a frequency meeting its resonance point. The warmth traveled up my arm and into my chest and detonated there in a way that was entirely unlike pain but too large to be comfortable. Every cell in my wolf nature firing simultaneously. Recognition on a scale that bypassed thought entirely and went straight to the level of the body's most fundamental knowing. My knees almost buckled. I held on. The curse mark began to change. I could feel it under my fingers, the geometry of it shifting, the raised edges softening, the unnatural heat cooling towards something that felt like the process reversing, like the working unmaking itself from the anchor outward. A sound came from somewhere that was not quite sound, felt more than heard, a subsonic frequency that resonated in the chest cavity and the back teeth. Cyrus made a sound I had never heard from him before. Not a growl, not any wolf sound I had a name for. A sound that came from somewhere between his animal nature and the man who had been surviving inside it for 4 years, raw and broken and enormous. The sound of something that has been held compressed for a very long time, finally being given permission to expand. The light changed, or rather, something changed that the eye registered as light, as heat, as a physical pressure in the room that made 60 people take a collective half-step backward and made me hold on harder, keep my fingers against the mark, keep Ember surging forward into the contact. Stay with me. And then it broke. The transformation was not graceful. It is never graceful, any wolf will tell you that. The shift is a biological event of great force and zero elegance. But this one had the additional quality of 4 years of accumulated compression releasing all at once. And the sound and the light and the physical reality of it in the room was something that I will spend the rest of my life failing to adequately describe. What I can describe is the moment it resolved, the moment it was finished. I was still reaching forward, my hand now against warm skin instead of fur, the mark beneath my fingers now fading, cooling, losing its wrongness the way a bruise loses its color. And the person in front of me, the person, the human form, the man straightened slowly from the final crouch of the shift and stood. Tall. He was tall in the way that carries authority rather than just height. Dark-haired, the hair still wild from the transformation, jaw sharp, hands large and steady. The build of someone who had been physically extraordinary before 4 years of survival had made them more so. And he opened his eyes. Silver. Still silver. The same eyes I had known in the dark, in the gray light, across 11 days of proximity and trust, and something that had been growing too precisely shaped to be called anything but what it was. He looked at me, for the first time, without the barrier of the curse between us, without the animal form between his face and mine. He looked at me, and I forgot, for the length of that moment, that there were 60 people in the room. Justice, when it came, was not theatrical. Cyrus did not rage, did not deliver speeches or perform his anger for the court. He stood in the throne room dressed now, Helda having produced clothes from the royal chambers with the efficiency of someone who had been waiting to perform this exact task, and he listened to Seraphine's final attempt at reframing the narrative with the patient, complete attention of a man who has been alone with his own thoughts for 4 years, and developed an extremely refined ability to identify the shape of lies. She was skilled. I will grant her that. The reframe was sophisticated, repositioning herself as a caretaker of a kingdom in crisis, a regent who had made necessary decisions to maintain stability in the absence of a clear successor, the curse a containment measure rather than an assassination, the offerings to the hollow a continuation of ancient tradition rather than a murder schedule. She delivered all of it with the steady confidence of someone accustomed to being the most politically sophisticated person in any room. Cyrus let her finish. Then he looked at Helda and said, in a voice that I was hearing for the first time, low and steady, and carrying in the way that true authority carries, not through volume, but through the complete absence of doubt. The archive records, the ones from the 4 years of her regency. Helda produced them. The records said what they said. The Hollow's offering schedule, documented in administrative language that did not understand it was documenting murder. The Curse Commission, filed under territorial containment measures. The correspondence with Charles's family, the arrangement, the timeline, the fee. The court read. The court went still. Seraphine did not speak again after that. The sentence for Seraphine was death. It was not a decision that was made quickly or performed for the room. Cyrus sat with his council assembled in the hour after the transformation. The members who had survived 4 years under Seraphine's regency with their integrity more or less intact and their relief at the morning's events barely contained, and the deliberation was real and unhurried. When it was decided, it was carried out with the same absence of theater. No spectacle, no cruelty. The execution of a sentence, clean and final, witnessed by the court in the formal tradition of pack justice. I was present because Cyrus had looked at me when the council session ended, and something in his eyes had made me understand that my presence was not required, but was wanted, and I had stayed. Seraphine went without performance. I had expected defiance, the dramatic last speech of someone who had operated on a grand scale and wanted the scale acknowledged. What she gave instead was silence. It was, in its way, more honest than anything she had said in the throne room. Charles was not executed. The deliberation on Charles was different in quality, not on the severity of the crime, which was not in question, but on the meaning of the punishment. Cyrus sat with that particular stillness I knew, the one that meant processing at depth, and the council waited. The slave mines, in the end. The sovereignty's eastern mines, where the work was hard and constant and the days were long and the compensation was survival and nothing else. Where a man who had built his entire life on positioning and calculation and the strategic use of other people would spend his remaining years in a context that had no use for any of those skills. Not merciful, but considered. When the council member recorded the sentence, Cyrus's eyes found mine across the room. I held them. I did not know what my face was doing exactly, but whatever it was, something in his expression settled. I had nothing left for Charles. Not rage, not grief, not even the satisfaction of watching justice land. The mark on my neck was still there. It would be for some time. Mate bonds don't dissolve with the person who made them, but it had lost its warmth. It had become simply a scar. Scars are information. They are not sentences. I intended to keep moving. The pack assembly was held at dusk. Cyrus's choice of timing, not the grand midday staging of political announcements, but the softer hour, when the light comes in low and warm, and the world is in the process of a different kind of transition. The full sovereignty court gathered in the great hall, the castle staff, the assembled representatives of the pack territories who had ridden hard on fast horses when word went out that something unprecedented had occurred, and they should be present for what came next. I stood at the edge of the hall during the assembly's opening, not hidden but not positioned anywhere that declared anything. I was in borrowed clothes that almost fit, with my hair done in the practical braid Helda had offered with the wordless efficiency of a woman whose job it is to ensure that people look like what they are before they walk into rooms that matter. Mara stood beside me. She was going home tomorrow, her own pack, her own situation to navigate, a husband who was going to have a very uncomfortable several weeks, and then a formal challenge before the pack council that I had absolute confidence she was going to win. She had arrived at the bottom of the world, a frightened 18-year-old, and was leaving it with the particular quality of presence that belongs to people who have discovered, under pressure, exactly what they're made of. We stood together and we watched Cyrus address his court for the first time in 4 years. He spoke without preamble and without performance. The recovery of his kingship in plain terms, what had been done, what had been corrected, what the path forward required. The voice I was still learning as a sound separate from the wolf I had known was remarkable in context not because of volume or rhetoric, but because of its quality of arrival, each sentence landing like it meant to be there, like someone who had been composing what he believed and what he intended for 4 years of silence and had simply been waiting for the occasion to say it. The court listened with the stillness of people being recovered. And then he stopped. The pause was long enough that the room shifted slightly, a collective micro-breath of attention. The court recalibrating. He looked at me. Across the hall, through 60 people and the warm evening light and the weight of everything the day had contained. He looked at me with those silver eyes that I had first met in the dark at the bottom of the world when I had expected hunger and found restraint, and the look was clear and complete and entirely unhidden. He had not been hiding anything, I realized, for a long time. He crossed the hall, stopped in front of me, and in front of his entire assembled court, with 60 witnesses and the full weight of what he was and what this meant bearing down on the moment from every direction he spoke. Morena of Aldemir. My name in his voice, for the first time, said with the particular care that people reserve for things they intend to keep. My true mate. The hall was absolutely silent. And my queen. The sound that moved through the assembly was not applause. It was older than applause, something more animal and more honest. The sound of 60 wolves responding to a bond being declared before the pack, the resonance of it moving through the room like a frequency through water. Ember pressed against my ribs so hard I nearly lost my breath. I looked at him. At this man I had first seen in the dark when I was falling, who had held himself still when instinct said otherwise, who had carved his name in stone, and listened for 11 days and stood at my shoulder in a throne room and opened his eyes from a 4-year curse and looked at me like I was the fixed point. He was looking at me now with that same complete, undefended attention, waiting, not with anxiety, with the steadiness of someone who has made their choice with their entire self and is simply present for whatever comes next. I took his hand, and I said, clearly enough for every person in that hall to hear, clearly enough for it to be a declaration in every sense the word carries, our throne. His mouth curved. I had not seen him smile before. I had seen restraint and pain and silver-eyed complexity and 100 variations of watchfulness that I had spent 11 days learning to read. But not this. Not the smile of a man who has been alone for a very long time and has just been handed a reason to be something else. It undid me, quietly and completely, in a way I had no interest in recovering from. His hand came up and touched the mark on my neck gently, the way you touch something you intend to replace with something better. And when he kissed me, it was in front of his entire court, and neither of us was performing anything at all. It was simply the truth of two people who had found each other at the bottom of the world, who had decided, separately and then together, to climb, and who had, against everything the world had arranged against them, made it out into the light. Thank you for listening to another emotional, magical shifter romance here on Moonbound Romance Tales. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, so you never miss more powerful, heart-gripping romance stories.